A simple clay pot might rewrite the entire story of human invention. This is the mystery of the Baghdad battery, an ancient artifact that suggests knowledge of electricity existed 2,000 years ago. By the end of this, you will understand how a single object can shatter our timeline of progress and force a complete rethinking of ancient science. We will investigate how it was built, why experts are fiercely divided, and what its silent existence implies about forgotten genius. How do you picture the moment someone first harnessed a spark from the distant past? It was the asphalt plug that first caught his attention. In a basement room of the Iraq Museum in Baghdad, archaeologist Wilhelm König sorted through artifacts recovered from a dig site near the village of Qujat. The objects were typical of the Parthian era, a time when the region was a crossroads between the Roman and Persian worlds. Yet one item stood apart, not for its ornate beauty, but for its strange, almost intentional construction. It was a simple terracotta jar about the size of a man's fist, sealed shut with a thick layer of bitumen. This ancient tar was more than just a stopper. It was a carefully fitted lid, and through its center, an iron rod had been inserted. Inside the jar, surrounding that rod but not touching it, was a rolled copper cylinder. The materials were humble: clay, copper, iron, and asphalt, but their assembly was puzzling. Nothing like it had been catalogued before. König, familiar with the basic principles of electricity, saw something familiar in the arrangement. Two different metals separated by an electrolyte, sealed in a container. It was the core design of a basic battery, a device the history books insisted was not invented for another 1800 years. His mind must have raced with the implications. Was this a one-off curiosity, a child's toy, or could it be evidence of a forgotten application? The artifact offered no manual, no inscription, not even a clear context within its burial site to explain its purpose. It was a silent, three-dimensional riddle left on a museum shelf, waiting for its question to be asked. This unassuming pot, catalogued and stored away, would slowly emerge as one of the most controversial and captivating puzzles in the history of archaeology, challenging the very narrative of when humanity first learned to coax power from the elements. The artifact's design is deceptively simple, a quiet assembly of common materials. That clay jar would have held wine or grain in any other context, unremarkable on its own. The bitumen seal, however, changes everything. This natural asphalt was more than a plug. It was a precisely fitted insulator, chosen for its ability to resist moisture and electricity. Inside, the arrangement becomes even more specific. A cylinder of rolled copper sheet, acting as one conductive surface, and an iron rod, acting as another, were kept meticulously apart by that asphalt plug. They were close, but they did not touch. This separation is the first critical clue. In any random storage container, metals might be tossed together, they might contact. Here, the design ensures they remain isolated, suspended in their own spaces within the jar. If you were to fill this vessel with an acidic liquid, something as simple as vinegar from a kitchen or fermented fruit juice, the stage would be set. The electrolyte would soak into the porous clay, bathing both the copper cylinder and the iron rod. And just like that, through a simple chemical reaction between the two dissimilar metals and the acidic solution, a small electrical voltage would be generated between them. This isn't a complex machine. It's the most fundamental principle of a battery. Two different metals, an electrolyte and a container. The fact that this ancient object mirrors that basic blueprint so perfectly is what transforms it from a curious pot into a profound anomaly. It feels less like a coincidence and more like a recipe, a set of instructions left in three-dimensional form. The artifact's simple design begs for a purpose. What could an ancient culture possibly do with a trickle of electricity, a voltage so small you would barely feel it? One theory offers a dazzling answer: rooted in the stunning artifacts the Parthians left behind. They were master metalworkers, creators of intricate jewelry and statues often adorned with whisper-thin layers of gold and silver. The traditional method for achieving this was a perilous process called fire gilding, which involved mixing gold with toxic mercury, applying it, and then heating the object to evaporate the mercury, leaving the gold behind. The health risks were severe and the process was difficult to control, but imagine a different, quieter method. If you placed a small silver statue in a solution containing gold particles, connected it to the copper cylinder of one of these clay jars, and connected the iron rod to a piece of pure gold, the weak current from the battery would slowly pull the gold particles from the solution and deposit them onto the statue's surface. This is electroplating, a modern technique for coating objects with metal. In the 1940s, a researcher named Willard F.M. Gray built a replica of the Baghdad battery, filled it with grape juice as an electrolyte, and successfully electroplated a small object with a layer of silver. The experiment worked. A single cell produces a very faint current, but multiple cells linked together could provide enough steady power for detailed work. This transforms the mysterious jar from a philosophical puzzle into a practical tool. It suggests a possible guild secret, a safer and more precise technology known only to a circle of elite artisans, used to gild sacred icons or adorn the belongings of the powerful. The loss of this knowledge would have been a quiet tragedy, relegating a subtle science back into the realm of dangerous brute force chemistry. The brilliance is in the application, not the raw power, using a fundamental force of nature to achieve an end of breathtaking beauty. Yet another possibility shifts the focus from artistry to the human body itself. Ancient medical records from Greece, Rome, and Egypt describe a fascinating practice, using live electric fish to soothe various ailments. Patients suffering from persistent headaches or joint pain would be instructed to stand on a torpedo ray in a shallow pool, or have a Nile catfish applied to the skin. The resulting jolt, while startling, provided a numbing relief that was attributed to the creature's mysterious energy. This documented history opens a compelling door for the Baghdad battery. If a single cell produces a faint tingle, several linked together could generate a consistent, controllable low-level current. Imagine a healer in a quiet room, placing 2 copper terminals from a series of these jars against a patient's temples or ailing joints. The gentle, buzzing sensation would have been a world apart from the unpredictable shock of a living fish, offering a repeatable and perhaps sacred form of therapy. This theory reimagines the artifact not as a tool for decoration, but as an instrument of care. It suggests an early intuition about energy within the body, a holistic blending of physical science and healing tradition that sought to correct imbalances with a subtle external force. This practice would not be formally explored in the West until Luigi Galvani's experiments with frog legs in the late 18th century, making the potential Parthian application profoundly ahead of its time. Here, the battery becomes a bridge between the tangible world of metals and acids and the intangible realm of wellness, a quiet technology aimed at alleviating human hardship through the most gentle of shocks. But perhaps the most profound purpose was not practical at all, but spiritual. In a world where the line between natural force and divine power was beautifully blurred, this simple jar could have been a sacred instrument. Think of the experience from the perspective of someone who knew nothing of electrons or voltage. A priest carefully pours a special liquid, perhaps wine or sacred water, into the vessel. After a moment, a subtle vibration is felt in the metal rod. Tiny bubbles begin to form on its surface. In a darkened inner chamber of a temple, a faint, eerie blue glow might even dance across the terminals. These are not the results of chemistry, they are miracles made manifest, the ability to summon a mysterious, invisible force from inert clay and metal, would have been the ultimate demonstration of authority. This knowledge would have been a closely guarded secret of the priestly class, a ritual technology used to make a metal icon seem to hum with life, or to cause a sliver of gold to mysteriously cling to a statue's hand as if by divine will. The battery, in this light, transforms from a tool into a relic. Its power was not measured in volts but in awe. It served to bridge the gap between the community and the gods, proving that the temple held the keys to forces beyond ordinary understanding. This theory explains why such a revolutionary concept might not have spread into common workshops or medical texts. It was never meant to be utilitarian. It was esoteric, designed to inspire faith and reinforce a sacred order. The artifact then becomes a silent witness to ceremonies long forgotten, a container not for electricity but for belief itself. This practical explanation offers a sobering counterweight to our wonder. Mainstream archaeology presents a far simpler and historically supported theory that the Baghdad battery was never a battery at all, but a secure container for sacred texts. In this view, every element of the artifact has a straightforward, mundane purpose. The clay jar itself is a common storage vessel. The thick bitumen seal was not an electrical insulator, but a perfect barrier against dampness and insects, preserving precious papyrus or parchment scrolls inside. The mysterious copper cylinder was likely just a protective case, and the iron rod was simply the core spindle around which the scroll was carefully wound. Over 2 millennia buried in the earth, the materials would have corroded and fused together through natural chemical processes, creating the accidental appearance of a deliberate electrochemical cell. This interpretation fits seamlessly with countless other finds from the period, where sealed jars were used to protect important documents. It requires no assumption of lost knowledge or advanced science, instead grounding the object in the well-documented material culture of its time. This perspective serves as a crucial reminder of a fundamental principle in archaeology. The simplest explanation that aligns with the broader evidence is often the most likely. It asks us to temper our fascination for the extraordinary with a disciplined respect for the ordinary, to see a storage jar before we see a power source. Yet, even within this grounded explanation, a quiet question remains. If it was merely a scroll jar, why has no trace of organic material, no fragment of parchment or papyrus, ever been found inside any of the similar vessels discovered? The absence of evidence within the evidence itself keeps the door to mystery slightly ajar. The silent potential within the clay had to speak for itself, and so researchers decided to build it again. They crafted precise replicas of the jar, the copper cylinder, and the iron rod, sealing them with bitumen just as the ancient artisans had. When filled with a simple electrolyte like vinegar or grape juice, something remarkable happened. The inert materials came to life, generating a measurable electrical potential. A single cell typically produces a faint voltage, somewhere between half a volt and 1.5 volts, with only a tiny trickle of current. To our modern senses, this seems trivial, a power level dwarfed by a single watch battery. But its significance is not measured in watts, it is measured in possibility. That gentle hum of energy is precisely enough to slowly electroplate a thin layer of gold or silver onto a small object in a controlled bath. It is also enough to deliver a distinct, tingling sensation to the skin, a sensation that would have felt like a contained, mystical force to someone who had never encountered a man-made spark before. The experiment works, the object is electrically feasible. This is the core of the mystery's tension. The artifact passes the basic functionality test. Yet the experiment also introduces a new variable, one that has long since evaporated into history. What liquid originally filled the jar? The choice of electrolyte is everything. While acidic solutions like vinegar work, some researchers have proposed that an alkaline electrolyte, perhaps water drawn from the local Euphrates River, which could have carried dissolved minerals, might have been even more effective or longer lasting. We are left testing a machine without its fuel, proving the engine can turn but not knowing what kind of fire the builders intended to use, so the practical tests deliver a clear but double-edged result. They definitively prove that the ancient design can function as a galvanic cell, shattering any argument that it is electrically inert. Yet they cannot prove that the Parthians or Babylonians ever connected that copper rod to that iron rod with a wire and put it to work. The vessel remains a question in the form of a pot, its proven potential making the search for its purpose all the more urgent and all the more elusive. This profound silence from the past is perhaps the most compelling argument against the battery. For all its elegant design, the artifact sits alone in the historical record, a solitary puzzle piece with no picture on the box to guide us. No excavation in the region has ever uncovered anything resembling a connecting wire, perhaps made of a perishable material like gold or copper thread. There are no clay tablets describing a tingling sensation from a sacred jar, no illustrations of priests holding two metal rods while a statue gleams. If this was a known technology, even a secret one guarded by a temple or a guild of artisans, its traces would be difficult to completely erase. We would expect to find more than one example, or at least some fragmentary tool that fits into a larger system. The fact that we have not speaks volumes. It suggests one of two possibilities. Either this knowledge was so fleeting, so experimental, that it was discovered and then almost immediately lost, a single bright spark that flickered out without igniting a wider flame. Or, far more likely from an archaeological standpoint, we are projecting a modern understanding onto an ancient object that served a completely different, more mundane purpose. The context around the find is not just quiet, it is a void. And in that void, the simplest explanations tend to resonate the loudest. We are left with a single, beautifully ambiguous artifact surrounded by an absence of corroborating evidence, making its story one of tantalizing potential rather than proven fact. Perhaps the most humbling perspective comes from looking beyond that single clay jar. The Baghdad battery does not stand alone as an anomaly. It is part of a quiet chorus of artifacts that whisper of forgotten sophistication. Far across the Mediterranean, in the wreckage of an ancient Greek ship, divers recovered a corroded bronze lump known as the Antikythera mechanism. When carefully studied, it revealed an intricate system of gears that could predict planetary movements and eclipse cycles with stunning accuracy, a mechanical computer centuries ahead of its time. In the forges of the medieval Islamic world, smiths produced the legendary Damascus steel, a metal with a distinctive watery pattern that was not only beautiful but incredibly strong and flexible, a metallurgical secret that was lost and has never been fully replicated. And deep within the rock-cut chambers of Malta's Hal Saflieni Hypogeum, a prehistoric underground temple, certain rooms possess a powerful acoustic resonance, a deep hum that seems intentionally designed to alter consciousness during rituals. These are not myths, they are physical objects and places that defy our linear timeline of progress. Each represents a peak of specialized knowledge in a specific field, astronomy, materials science, and acoustical engineering, that flourished and then faded from common use. Seen in this light, the potential of the Baghdad battery feels less like a shocking anachronism and more like a familiar pattern. It suggests that ancient civilizations could achieve extraordinary, focused technological heights without embarking on a full-scale industrial revolution. Their genius was often applied to solving particular cultural or spiritual problems, not to creating a network of widespread convenience. A technology like electroplating or electrotherapy would have served a narrow, perhaps elite purpose. When that specific need vanished, or when the guild that guarded the secret disbanded due to war, migration, or social change, the knowledge could simply evaporate. It was not written into textbooks for posterity. It lived in the hands and minds of a few practitioners. This global context invites us to shift our view of the past. We should not see ancient societies as primitive steps on a ladder leading directly to us, but as diverse gardens of innovation, each cultivating its own unique and sometimes ephemeral blooms of understanding. The true mystery then becomes not how they built such a thing, but why we are so surprised that they could. That single artifact did not emerge from a vacuum, but from one of history's most dynamic crossroads. To grasp the possibility of an ancient battery, we must step into the world of the Parthian Empire. For nearly 5 centuries, from around 247 BCE to 224 CE, they controlled the heart of the old Persian Empire and the fertile lands of Mesopotamia. This was not a stagnant backwater. It was the central hub of the Silk Road, a pulsating network where caravans carried more than just silk and spices. They carried ideas. In the bustling markets of cities like Ctesiphon, a Greek philosopher's debate on natural forces could mingle with a Persian alchemist's notes on metal purification, an Indian physician's treatise on healing energies, and tales of Chinese innovations in chemistry. The Parthians themselves were formidable engineers and adaptive rulers, famously mastering the complex cataphract cavalry and advanced siege warfare. They were pragmatic problem solvers in a world of constant exchange. In such an environment where cultures collided and knowledge was a prized commodity, the conditions were perfect for experimental leaps. A curious artisan, inspired by the Greek fascination with natural phenomena and armed with Eastern metallurgical secrets, might have begun tinkering. The combination of a copper vessel, an iron rod, and a common acidic solution like vinegar or wine is not a stretch in a society that worked intimately with metals and fermentation. The battery, if it was one, fits this profile perfectly, a humble, practical tool possibly born from this incredible synthesis. It wouldn't need to be a world-changing revelation, just a useful local innovation, a guild secret for plating sacred objects or a healer's device, discovered in one vibrant corner of a vast, interconnected world and then, like so many specialized crafts, lost when that particular corner faded. The Parthian era provides the plausible crucible, a historical backdrop where such a quiet spark of genius could indeed have been struck. The most convincing evidence for the battery often comes not from dusty museum cases, but from a modern workshop bench. Across countless documentaries and independent online videos, the artifact steps out of the realm of speculation and into tangible reality. We watch as a potter shapes a small clay jar, a metalsmith carefully rolls a sheet of copper into a cylinder, and a blacksmith forges a simple iron rod. Bitumen, still gathered from natural seeps in the region, is warmed and poured to form a perfect airtight seal. The replica is complete, an identical twin to the object found near Baghdad. Then comes the crucial test. The host fills the jar with a liquid the ancients knew intimately, perhaps vinegar from fermented dates or the tart juice of a pomegranate. They connect the copper and iron to the leads of a digital multimeter. The screen flickers and a number appears: 0.8 volts, 1.2 volts, a small but definitive electrical potential. This moment is a silent bridge across 2 millennia. It demonstrates beyond any theoretical debate that the physical recipe left to us works as a primitive galvanic cell. The materials were all locally available, the construction well within the period's craft traditions, and the outcome is a quiet, measurable flow of energy. These recreations make the impossible suddenly seem ordinary. They show that you do not need a textbook understanding of electrochemistry to produce this effect. You simply need curiosity and a willingness to experiment. An artisan noticing a strange tingle while cleaning a copper pot with an iron tool in acidic wine, or observing bubbles forming on one metal but not another, could have been the first spark. By linking several jars together in a series, these modern experimenters can increase the voltage enough to power a small light-emitting diode or electroplate a ring with a shimmer of gold, creating a visceral, visual link between the ancient world and our own. These demonstrations are powerful because they democratize the mystery. They transform it from an academic argument into a hands-on puzzle that anyone with basic craft skills could theoretically solve, which is precisely what makes the idea of an ancient discovery so compelling. If we can do it in a garage with tools from a local hardware store, why couldn't a skilled Parthian metalsmith have done the same in his workshop 2,000 years ago? The gap in time suddenly feels much narrower, filled not with magic, but with the universal human drive to tinker and observe. This quiet clay pot has ignited a surprisingly fierce debate that reaches far beyond its physical form. At its heart, the discussion is a fundamental clash between two ways of seeing the ancient world. On one side are scholars who champion a conservative, evidence-based approach. They argue that archaeology must be a disciplined science, building narratives only from what can be conclusively proven by multiple lines of evidence. For them, a single, context-poor artifact like the Baghdad battery is intriguing but ultimately insufficient to rewrite history. Prominent archaeologists such as Dr. Elizabeth Stone have long cautioned against what they see as romanticizing the past, warning that projecting modern concepts onto ancient objects can lead us astray. From this viewpoint, the simplest explanation that it was a scroll jar remains the most responsible conclusion until new, unambiguous data emerges. Standing across this intellectual divide are researchers more open to speculative possibilities. They argue that an over-reliance on conservative interpretation can sometimes blind us to genuine anomalies that challenge our assumptions. Scholars like Dr. Paul T. Kieser have published serious academic papers considering the artifact's electrochemical feasibility, treating it not as fantasy but as a legitimate puzzle worthy of scientific inquiry. This perspective asks a provocative question. If our timeline of technological progress is based on the evidence we have found, what happens when we find something that does not fit? Should we dismiss it immediately, or does it become a catalyst to re-examine what we think we know? These thinkers are often labeled diffusionists, as they are more willing to consider the possibility of lost or isolated advances that did not spread widely. The conflict, then, is not really about a jar. It is a microcosm of a much larger tension in how we reconstruct history. Do we paint the past using only the colors we are absolutely sure were on the palette? Or do we allow a few strokes of intriguing, uncertain hue to suggest a broader, more complex picture? The battery forces this choice into the open. For the traditionalist, it is an outlier that must be explained within known frameworks, lest the entire discipline become untethered from fact. For the open-minded researcher, it is a key that might unlock a door we did not even know was closed. A hint that ancient innovation may have taken paths we have yet to fully map. This debate compels every one of us to examine our own biases. We are naturally drawn to narratives of lost wisdom and advanced ancient knowledge. It is a compelling story. Yet we must also respect the meticulous, often slow work of science that protects us from seeing patterns that are not there. The Baghdad battery, sitting silently in its museum case, does not resolve this tension. Instead, it masterfully sustains it, acting as a mirror that reflects back our own desires about the past. Do we see what we hope to find, or do we see only what the evidence strictly allows? Perhaps the artifact's greatest power is not in generating electricity, but in generating this very conversation, a timeless dialogue between wonder and rigor that continues to charge our understanding of human history. The artifact's journey did not end in a museum basement. It escaped into the collective imagination, becoming a cornerstone of modern mythology. You will find the Baghdad battery featured not just in archaeology texts, but in best-selling books about ancient astronauts, in dramatic television specials exploring lost civilizations, and as a mysterious power source in popular video games. In these narratives, the simple clay pot is often presented as definitive proof, a smoking gun for ideas that mainstream science dismisses. It becomes evidence that extraterrestrial visitors provided advanced technology, or that a global society like Atlantis possessed wisdom far beyond our own before a great cataclysm reset humanity. While these sweeping theories lack the rigorous evidence demanded by historians, their incredible popularity is revealing. They point to a profound and widespread longing, a desire to re-enchant our past. In a world often explained by cold data and linear progress, the battery represents a tantalizing crack in that story. It invites us to wonder if history holds grander, more mysterious truths than our textbooks allow, suggesting our ancestors may have grasped concepts we consider modern. This transformation from disputed artifact to cultural icon is a story in itself. The object serves as a perfect blank canvas, its true purpose unknown and its origins quiet. Because it offers no definitive answers, it can effortlessly absorb our deepest questions about human origin and potential. We project onto it our hopes for a more magical yesterday and our anxieties about lost wisdom, turning a humble jar into a symbol of endless possibility. Its power in popular culture is not measured in volts, but in its ability to sustain wonder, to keep alive the thrilling question of what else might be waiting silently for us to rediscover. The physical metal itself should tell a story if only we could read its language. To settle the debate, scientists have turned their attention not to the pot's shape, but to the silent chemistry etched into its iron and copper. The theory makes a clear prediction. If this vessel was truly an electrochemical cell filled and used repeatedly, the metals would not have aged randomly. They would bear the signature of galvanic corrosion. In such a setup, the iron rod, acting as the anode, would have sacrificially dissolved ions into the electrolyte solution, leaving it pitted and eroded in a very specific pattern. The copper cylinder, acting as the cathode, would have been largely protected from this corrosive process. Some examinations of the original artifact have indeed noted that the iron rod is heavily corroded, almost consumed in places, while the copper cylinder shows a different, less aggressive form of degradation. For those who believe in the battery, this is a compelling fingerprint, the expected wear and tear from generating current, yet the counterargument is just as strong. An iron rod buried in damp, mineral-rich soil for 2,000 years will corrode aggressively all on its own. The simple presence of moisture and salts in the earth can produce damage that looks, to our eyes, identical to galvanic corrosion. Distinguishing between natural decay from the soil and intentional decay from an ancient acidic liquid becomes a monumental challenge. The most definitive answers might lie beneath the surface in the microscopic world. Advanced techniques like scanning electron microscopy could, in theory, analyze the very molecules of the corrosion crust. Scientists could search for chemical residues trapped within, traces of an ancient electrolyte like acetic acid from vinegar, or even minute particles of gold or silver that would suggest electroplating activity. But here, the investigation hits a wall of preservation. The Baghdad battery is a rare, singular museum piece. Authorities are understandably reluctant to permit invasive testing that requires scraping away samples or subjecting the fragile clay and metal to potentially damaging procedures. The quest for conclusive physical evidence is caught in a paradox. The tests that could prove its function might also harm the irreplaceable artifact we are trying to understand. So the metals remain, holding their secrets in a microscopic code we cannot yet decipher without cost. The corrosion patterns are a Rorschach test in rust and verdigris, each observer seeing what their theory prepares them to see. This ambiguity is the artifact's final, masterful defense. It presents evidence just persuasive enough to keep the question alive, but just ambiguous enough to resist a definitive answer, forever balancing on the knife's edge between a revolutionary tool and a profoundly ordinary container. This quiet jar challenges more than our timeline. It challenges our deepest assumptions about how knowledge itself grows. We are taught a story of relentless upward progress, a grand staircase where each generation builds upon the last. The discovery of fire leads to the furnace, the wheel leads to the cart, the printing press leads to the internet. It is a comforting, linear narrative where every breakthrough is a permanent step forward, secured in the library of human achievement. But the possibility of an ancient battery shatters this clean trajectory. It introduces a far more complex and humbling idea that profound understanding can appear, shine brilliantly in a specific time and place, and then vanish from the collective memory as if it never was. This is not linear progress, it is punctuated development, a landscape of isolated peaks separated by vast valleys of forgetting. Imagine a mountain range where a single, towering summit emerges from the mist, only to be swallowed by clouds again for centuries before the next peak is climbed. The battery, if real, is one such lonely summit. It suggests that a society could master a principle like electrochemistry for a singular purpose, perhaps to gild sacred idols or create a healing ritual, without ever developing a broader theory of electricity, without inventing the light bulb or the motor. The knowledge was complete in its application, yet fragile in its transmission. It lived in the hands of a few artisans or priests, not in textbooks or public universities. When that guild dissolved, when that temple fell, or when social priorities shifted, the technology simply evaporated. It was not a step on a staircase. It was a beautiful, ephemeral bloom in a distant intellectual garden. This perspective forces a sobering reflection on our own place in history. Our global, hyper-connected, data-backed technological civilization feels permanent and inevitable in point. But the artifact whispers that this is an illusion. Our dominance is not guaranteed. It is the product of a specific and perhaps unusually stable set of conditions that allow knowledge to be widely recorded, shared, and built upon. It reminds us that civilizations are not just builders, they are also forgetters. They can misplace entire libraries of practical wisdom, leaving behind only silent, puzzling artifacts as clues to their former heights. The philosophical weight of the Baghdad battery, then, lies in its quiet warning against arrogance. It asks us to look at our own world of miracles and consider which of our technologies might one day become future mysteries, which of our peaks might someday be valleys, waiting for another culture to climb them all over again. A single jar's faint tingle seems almost trivial, but the ancient design holds a hidden potential for real power. The true genius of the concept is not in the individual cell, but in its ability to be scaled. Imagine an artisan lining up 10 of these clay pots on a wooden bench. Using simple metal strips or even copper wire, they connect the iron rod of the first jar to the copper cylinder of the second, and so on down the line. This is what we call connecting them in series, and the effect is not just additive, it's transformative. Where one cell might produce a mere half a volt, 10 linked together could generate 5 volts, and a bank of 20 could approach the power of a small modern battery. Suddenly, that gentle buzz becomes a jolt you cannot ignore. This scaled-up source could electroplate a larger object with a smooth, even layer of gold in a fraction of the time, or deliver a therapeutic current strong enough to cause visible muscle contraction. It shifts the device from a curious novelty into a genuinely practical tool. The principle is elegantly simple, requiring no understanding of advanced theory, just the observational logic that linking more units creates a stronger effect. Any culture that grasped the basic function of a single cell would have inevitably stumbled upon this multiplicative principle through experimentation. The silence in the archaeological record, the fact that no such connected array has ever been unearthed, is the skeptic's strongest counterpoint here. If this was a utilized technology, where are the workshops, the banks of jars, the caches of connecting wires? Yet this absence is not a definitive refutation. Consider what such a system would leave behind after 2 millennia. The durable components, the clay jars and metal rods, might survive, but the perishable links, the plant fiber cords perhaps coated in a thin layer of conductive metal, or the animal gut used to tie them together, would have decayed into dust long ago. Even thin metal strips could have corroded beyond recognition or been scavenged for reuse. We are left, as so often in archaeology, with the skeleton of a potential system, missing all its connective tissue. This gap forces a question about the nature of evidence itself. Does the lack of a complete, preserved kit mean the kit never existed? Or does it simply mean that history has returned to us only the most durable fragments of a delicate and sophisticated practice? The unlinked jars we possess could be the scattered pieces of a larger, invisible whole, waiting not to be found but to be understood. Perhaps the most elegant solution lies not in our modern categories, but in the ancient mind itself. To understand the Baghdad battery, we must step into the world of alchemy, the profound proto-science that sought to unlock the secrets of matter and spirit. Across the ancient world, from China to Egypt and into the heart of Mesopotamia, practitioners believed that base metals could be transmuted into noble ones like gold, and that a universal elixir could grant longevity. This was not mere superstition, it was a rigorous, symbolic, and experimental tradition that bridged chemistry, philosophy, and mysticism. Within this framework, the sealed clay jar transforms completely. Its precise construction is no longer aiming for electrical current, but for a different kind of transformation. The iron rod, associated with the god and planet Mars for its strength, and the copper cylinder, linked to Venus for its beauty, were not electrodes but symbolic representations. Placed together in a sealed vessel, they created a miniature model of the cosmos, a closed system where their metallic essences could interact under controlled conditions. The thick bitumen seal was absolutely critical, not as an electrical insulator, but as a hermetic barrier. It would have contained the volatile vapors and spirits released during a long-term reaction, perhaps as the jar was heated gently over weeks or months, allowing the practitioner to collect a purified distillate or observe a slow change in the metals. This vessel becomes a philosophical instrument, a tool for probing the hidden relationships between materials and the forces that animate them. The goal was not to power a device, but to witness and perhaps catalyze a fundamental change in the nature of the substances themselves. This interpretation resolves many puzzles. It explains the careful selection and separation of specific metals without requiring a wire to connect them. It gives profound meaning to the airtight seal, a hallmark of alchemical apparatus designed to prevent the escape of precious spiritual principles, and it places the object squarely within a well-documented historical and intellectual context of its time and region. The artifact shifts from being an anomalous technological leap to being a sophisticated piece of cultural equipment, a tangible expression of humanity's timeless drive to comprehend and influence the very fabric of the material world. In this light, the jar's silence is not a mystery but a testament. It speaks the quiet language of experiment and symbol, holding within its clay walls not a forgotten spark, but a captured question about the universe asked 2,000 years ago. The raw ingredients for this potential technology were not rare treasures, but the everyday stuff of life in ancient Mesopotamia. If the Baghdad battery was a deliberate invention, its creator did not need to search far for materials. Copper was a cornerstone of regional trade and craftsmanship, hammered into tools, vessels, and ornaments. Iron, while less common than bronze during the Parthian era, was certainly known and prized for its strength. The thick bitumen seal presents no mystery at all. It oozed naturally from the ground in great seeps across the region, harvested for millennia as a powerful waterproof adhesive and mortar for buildings. And the vital electrolyte, any kitchen or storeroom could provide it. Vinegar, produced from spoiled wine or fermented date palm sap, was a common preservative. Even citrus juices, though imported, could have arrived via the bustling trade routes that connected the Mediterranean to the east. From a purely practical, resource-based standpoint, there is no barrier here. Every component was locally available or easily traded, affordable, and required no advanced mining or manufacturing techniques beyond the ordinary craft skills of the time. This simple availability changes the entire nature of the debate. It removes the question of possibility. If a curious artisan observed the tingling effect of dissimilar metals in an acidic solution, replicating that discovery would have been straightforward. One could imagine a workshop producing not just one, but dozens of these cells with relative ease. The mystery then deepens in a new way. It is no longer a question of how they could have built it, but rather, if it was so simple to build, why does the archaeological record seem so empty? The shift is crucial, moving the puzzle from the realm of materials and into the realm of culture and application. Perhaps the technology was so specialized, so tightly held within a small guild or temple, that its use was intentionally limited and its artifacts were rarely deposited in ways that survive. Or perhaps the effect was noted but never deemed useful enough to pursue beyond a fleeting experiment. The very accessibility of the parts makes their silent absence in larger numbers all the more provocative, forcing us to wonder not about ancient capability but about ancient choice. Wilhelm König's name is now permanently etched into this mystery, a man who stood at the crossroads of observation and imagination. His background is a crucial piece of the puzzle, not as an archaeologist formally trained in a university, but as a former museum worker and painter who had served as an assistant in the Iraq Museum. This placed him in a unique position, surrounded by artifacts yet not bound by the rigid orthodoxies of academic archaeology. More importantly, he lived in an era of visible, thrilling electrical advancement, where batteries, telegraphs, and early lights were transforming the modern world. When he encountered that sealed jar with its distinct copper and iron arrangement, his mind did not default to scroll storage. It made a startling, intuitive leap to the galvanic cells he would have known from contemporary science. His subsequent report and writings reveal a fascinating duality. He meticulously described the object's physical properties, its bitumen seal, the precise placement of the metals, all with an observer's care. Then came the speculative leap, the suggestion that this could have been an ancient galvanic cell, perhaps used for electroplating. He presented it not as a proven fact, but as a compelling question. This is the heart of his legacy. Was König a visionary who correctly decoded a silent technology? Or was he a dreamer who inadvertently cast a modern shadow onto the past? The evidence does not definitively prove him right, but his act of asking the question changed everything. Before König, the artifact was a catalogue entry, a curious part. After his interpretation, it became a riddle that demanded to be solved. By introducing the electrical hypothesis, he performed an invaluable service to historical inquiry. He disrupted complacency. He forced archaeologists, historians, and later the public to confront the possibility that our timelines might be incomplete, that ancient innovation could wear the humble face of a clay jar. His interpretation, regardless of its ultimate accuracy, gifted us with a more inquisitive and imaginative way of seeing. The object is no longer just an object. It is a conversation between the past and the present, a debate that König had the courage to start. In that sense, his greatest contribution was not providing an answer, but ensuring the question would echo for generations. The standard timeline of electricity reads like a well-ordered story. We begin with Thales of Miletus in the 6th century before the Common Era, noting how amber, when rubbed, could attract feathers, a curiosity of static charge. Then the narrative leaps forward 2,000 years to William Gilbert in the year 1600, whose book systematically categorized electrical phenomena. Finally, it culminates with Alessandro Volta in 1800, who stacked alternating disks of zinc and copper to create the first true battery, the voltaic pile, and launched the modern electrical age. It is a clean, upward arc from observation to understanding to application. But if the Baghdad artifact was indeed a cell, this entire timeline fractures. It inserts a functioning device a full millennium before Gilbert and over 1,000 years before Volta, creating a baffling gap in the historical record. This would not be a minor footnote, but a profound silent period, a dark age of electrical knowledge where the technology apparently existed, even thrived in a limited way, and then completely vanished from collective memory. Such a disappearance feels shocking to our modern sensibilities, yet it is not without precedent in the long, winding journey of human ideas. The most famous parallel is the shape of our world. Ancient Greek philosophers like Pythagoras and later Aristotle argued for a spherical Earth based on observations of lunar eclipses and the mast of ships disappearing over the horizon. This knowledge was preserved and expanded in the Islamic world, yet in medieval Europe it faded into obscurity or was actively rejected in favor of a flat Earth model, only to be dramatically rediscovered and confirmed during the Age of Exploration. A key insight was lost not for a century but for nearly 1,000 years. The potential battery fits this pattern perfectly. It suggests that a practical application of electricity could have been discovered, utilized, and then forgotten because the discovery existed in isolation. Think of it as a single, brilliant star in an otherwise empty sky. The theoretical framework needed to understand why it worked, the concepts of electrons, circuits, and electromagnetic fields, was still millennia away. Without that supporting science, the device would have remained exactly what it appears to be, a practical trick. An artisan might know that combining this jar, this liquid, and these two metals produced a faint tingle or caused gold to slowly migrate onto a statue. But Chinese letter, the underlying principle, would have been a complete mystery. It was a technology operating without a theory, a tool whose true nature was hidden even from its most skilled users. This is perhaps the most humbling possibility of all, that a civilization could harness a fundamental force of the universe through careful recipe and observation, while the profound truth of what they were doing remained just out of reach, waiting for a future age to supply the missing words to the story. Yet the story of this artifact is not locked in the past. For the people of modern Iraq, the land where it was unearthed, the Baghdad battery carries a resonance that transcends academic debate. In a nation whose very soil is layered with the history of Babylon, Sumer, and the Abbasid Caliphate, the object is more than a mystery, it is a symbol. It serves as a tangible point of pride, a physical link to an era when this region was a global epicenter of learning and innovation. The same rivers that nourished the world's first cities, the Tigris and Euphrates, also flow through a landscape of profound intellectual heritage. In school classrooms across the country, the battery is presented not as an unsolved puzzle for foreigners, but as evidence of their ancestors' remarkable ingenuity. It sparks the imagination of young Iraqi students, inspiring future engineers, archaeologists, and physicists to see their own history as a source of limitless possibility. For local scientists and historians, it is a source of enduring fascination, a homegrown enigma that invites investigation and pride in equal measure. This cultural significance offers a crucial counter-narrative. In global media, the region's modern story is often framed through a narrow lens of hardship. The Baghdad battery quietly challenges that single story. It represents a different legacy, one defined not by loss but by discovery. It speaks of a deep-seated human curiosity that has flourished in this land for thousands of years, a relentless drive to observe, experiment, and harness the subtle forces of the natural world. The artifact becomes a bridge connecting a modern citizen looking at a museum display with an ancient artisan who might have held that very jar, both united by a shared heritage of inquiry. It reaffirms an identity not as a place defined by contemporary challenges, but as a timeless cradle of thinkers, inventors, and scholars whose quiet experiments still have the power to electrify our understanding of history itself. The fragility of human knowledge is its most haunting quality. We often think of progress as a river flowing steadily forward, but history shows it can be more like a desert oasis, flourishing in one isolated pocket before drying up completely. This wasn't just about forgetting, it was about the deliberate and often necessary act of keeping secrets. Across the ancient world, the most advanced techniques were not public knowledge. They were proprietary crafts, guarded with the same intensity a modern corporation protects its intellectual property. The legendary Greek fire, a napalm-like substance that burned even on water, was such a closely held state secret of the Byzantine Empire that its exact formula died with the few engineers who knew it. The Romans perfected a concrete that could set underwater and endure for millennia, a recipe that was somehow lost in the transition to the medieval era and only rediscovered by modern chemists analyzing ancient samples. And the smiths who forged the legendary Damascus steel blades, with their distinctive watery patterns and incredible flexibility, took their precise methods of folding and cooling the metal to their graves. In each case, a peak of technological achievement simply evaporated because the knowledge lived in too few hands. Apply this model to our humble clay jar, and its solitary presence begins to make a tragic kind of sense. If the Baghdad battery was a tool for electroplating sacred icons or generating a ritual charge, it wouldn't have been common workshop knowledge. It would have been the exclusive domain of a small, elite group, perhaps a single family of master metalworkers sworn to secrecy, or a temple priesthood that used the effect to demonstrate divine favor. This knowledge would have been transmitted orally and through hands-on apprenticeship, a living library contained within a few minds. The vulnerability of such a system is profound. A single calamity could erase it forever. If that guild was disbanded by a conquering army, if a plague took the masters before they trained their successors, or if the social and religious order that funded their specialized work simply collapsed, the technique could vanish within a single generation. The physical tools, the jars and rods, might be left behind in a hurried abandonment or buried for safekeeping, but the understanding of how to use them, the why behind their assembly, would be gone. This transforms the artifact from an inexplicable anomaly into a potential relic of a lost guild. It is no longer a mystery that it stands alone. That is precisely what we should expect from a secret science. Its very solitude in the archaeological record is the signature of a technology that was never meant to be widespread, a single, silent witness to a craft that flickered out when its keepers were gone. That thick, dark plug is the artifact's silent guardian. The bitumen used was no ordinary tar. It was a premium material sourced from the natural seeps near Hit, a region famed across the ancient world for producing the purest, most stable asphalt. Its selection was a deliberate choice, not an accident of convenience. This substance transforms from a simple stopper into a sophisticated component with multiple critical functions. First and most compelling for the electrical theory, it acts as a near-perfect insulator. Terracotta clay is porous. It can absorb moisture from the air or from a liquid inside. Without that bitumen barrier, any conductive path could form through the damp clay wall itself, allowing a potential charge to bleed uselessly away from the iron rod to the copper cylinder, effectively short-circuiting the cell before it could do any work. The plug isolates the two metals, ensuring that any current generated must travel through an external path, like a wire, to complete a circuit. Second, it creates a hermetic, airtight seal. If the jar was meant to hold an acidic electrolyte like vinegar or wine, this seal would be absolutely essential. It would prevent the liquid from slowly evaporating over time, which would alter the concentration of the acid and kill the battery's function. A stable, long-lasting cell requires a stable environment, and this plug provides it. Yet this same feature supports the opposing theory with equal strength. If the jar was a secure container for a precious papyrus or parchment scroll, an airtight, waterproof seal would be the single most important feature for preservation, protecting the delicate organic material from humidity, insects, and decay. The bitumen serves both master theories perfectly. This duality is what makes the object so endlessly fascinating. The sophistication lies not in proving one idea right, but in demonstrating the maker's profound material intelligence. Whoever assembled this jar understood the properties of bitumen intimately, its impermeability, its durability, and its isolating quality. They fashioned it not as a crude glob, but as a carefully fitted component that locked the internal elements into precise, isolated positions. This level of intentionality is the true message of the artifact. It whispers of a craftsman who was not just assembling parts, but engineering a system, whether that system was designed to preserve a sacred text or to harness a quiet, mysterious force from the heart of a simple clay pot. The artifact's quiet potential has not been confined to academic journals. It has sparked entire worlds. The idea of ancient electricity has become a powerful current in creative genres like steampunk and retrofuturism, where it serves as a perfect historical anchor. These stories thrive on the thrilling premise that advanced technology could have emerged in a different era, built from brass, steam, and ingenuity rather than silicon and plastic. A writer or game designer looking for a seed of plausibility needs only to point to the Baghdad battery. It becomes the foundational proof within their fiction, the tangible artifact that makes the impossible feel eerily possible. This creative spark ignites countless what-if scenarios. What if the great library of Alexandria had never burned, and its accumulated knowledge, perhaps including principles of electrochemistry, had been preserved and expanded? What if Archimedes' legendary war machines and inventions on Syracuse had been fully realized, leading to an industrial revolution in the classical world? Or closer to home, what if Babylonian priests did not just pray to the gods of storm and sky, but learned to mimic their lightning within the sealed confines of a clay jar, commanding subtle electrical forces for sacred rites? These narratives are not just entertainment, they are philosophical experiments. They use the battery as a key to unlock alternate doors in the mansion of history, allowing us to wander down corridors we never knew existed. In doing so, these creative works highlight the artifact's most undeniable power. Regardless of its original function, its greatest output has never been measured in volts. It is a generator of wonder, a catalyst for the imagination. It gives us permission to question the linear, inevitable march of progress we take for granted. The battery whispers that our present was not the only possible outcome, that history is a tapestry of choices, accidents, and lost chances. By inspiring authors and artists, it allows us to vicariously explore those lost chances, to live for a moment in a world where the past took a sharper, more brilliant turn. In this sense, the humble clay pot achieves something monumental. It transcends the debate between artifact and scroll jar, becoming something far more enduring, a timeless vessel for human curiosity and the endless creative question, what if? The true legacy of the Baghdad battery is not a solved equation, but a sustained conversation. It sits at a crossroads, a single point where two perfectly valid paths diverge into the fog of history. One path, paved with the disciplined stones of archaeology, leads to a simple storage jar, a secure home for a scroll long since returned to dust. The other, illuminated by the spark of modern experimentation, winds toward a workshop where a forgotten artisan might have gilded an icon with a current pulled from vinegar and metal. Both destinations are plausible, neither can claim the final map. This enduring ambiguity is the artifact's greatest gift to us. It refuses closure, demanding instead that we hold two competing truths in our minds at once. We must respect the meticulous, evidence-based caution of the scholar, while also making room for the visionary leap of the curious experimenter. In that tension, we find a richer, more vibrant picture of the past, one that is not a fixed timeline but a living field of possibilities. The jar's silent presence reminds us that history is not merely a record of what we have proven, but also a landscape of what we have yet to understand. It champions intellectual humility, asking us to acknowledge that our current narrative of progress is a story we are still writing, and that every so often, a relic from the ground can suggest a thrilling, alternate chapter. So let this be the takeaway, not a verdict but an invitation. The next time you hear a tale of an out-of-place artifact or a seemingly impossible ancient feat, remember this simple clay pot. Let it give you pause, let it make you wonder. For every accepted truth in our history books, there may be a quiet, dusty jar on a museum shelf, waiting for a curious mind to ask the right question. What other everyday objects from the ancient world might hold unimagined secrets? What forgotten applications of natural principles are still buried, just beneath the surface of our understanding? The search for those answers is what keeps the story of our past endlessly alive. Share your own theories and reflections in the comments, and if you want to explore more mysteries where history and possibility collide, subscribe for our next journey to the edges of the known.